Hawaii is one of those places where nature has to be protected at all costs, if only because there are so many endemic species of plants and animals here. In fact, the islands can rightfully be called a kind of nature reserve. However, one day, all that natural beauty saw the arrival of creatures that had never existed in Hawaii, mongooses. Small predators not usually seen as dangerous or problematic. They were introduced with one clear goal: to get rid of the rats. But as is often the case, bringing in non-native animals by humans went off course and ended up a full-blown catastrophe. So what happened there? Let's find out. Hawaii, as a volcanic archipelago, has always been famous for its unique and isolated ecosystem. But in the 19th century, when the islands became a hub of global sugar production, this fragile balance came under threat. With the growth of agriculture and the revival of trade routes, Hawaii, along with the other blessings of civilization, also received some uninvited guests: rats. They arrived on merchant ships and quickly settled into their new world, where they had no natural enemies and food was in endless supply. Rats, with their incredible ability to reproduce, quickly overran the sugarcane plantations. A female of this species can have 3 to 6 litters a year, each with 4 to 8 pups. This means that in just 1 year, a single pair of rats can produce 20 to 40 babies, and within another year, their numbers can be counted in the hundreds. Such rapid growth allowed these invasive creatures to spread quickly across the scattered patches of land in the Hawaiian archipelago. This was a real blow to the island's economy. The rodents didn't just nibble on the sugarcane crop, they practically tore it apart, gnawing through the stalks and costing farmers a huge chunk of their profits. All too often, planting season turned into a battle that humans were doomed to lose. By the end of the 19th century, the rats that had arrived on the islands had become a disaster for sugarcane, causing huge losses. And by the end of the 20th century, with more plantations and rats spreading even further across Hawaii, the losses were running into millions of dollars every year. Farmers were desperately looking for ways to protect their land, but traditional methods of dealing with rodents, like traps and poison, did little against a clever enemy that multiplies at an incredible speed. Rats are incredibly tough and smart, which allowed them to easily avoid any traps and build resistance to poison. But the economic damage was only one side of the story. The unique nature of Hawaii faced an even greater threat. Before humans arrived, and along with them the rats, the islands had no mammalian predators. Local species, especially birds, evolved in complete safety. They nested on the ground, laid their eggs in shelters with no need to defend themselves, and rats, being omnivores, found in this defenselessness the perfect source of food. They started raiding nests, eating eggs and chicks, and sometimes even hunting adult birds, which caused the populations of many endemic species found only on the Hawaiian Islands to drop rapidly. For example, the Hawaiian petrel, known for its rather hardcore way of life, was put at risk. The birds dive up to 33 feet deep to hunt for food, yet because of invasive animals in the second half of the 20th century, their numbers dropped fast, and the species had to be listed as endangered. A similar situation happened with the Hawaiian goose, or nene, and several other endemic species of ducks and geese. Some of them suffered heavily due to invasive threats. Some went completely extinct. Not only birds were affected, but also green sea turtles, which laid their eggs on the shore, making them easy prey for the introduced rodents. In short, rats became a sharp-toothed, long-tailed disaster for Hawaii's ecosystems. Apart from the economic damage and environmental disaster, rats posed a serious and ongoing threat to human health as they naturally carry and transmit numerous dangerous bacterial and viral diseases. The problem of leptospirosis, a bacterial infection caused by spirochetes of the genus Leptospira, has become especially pressing in Hawaii. This disease, also known as rat fever or Weil's disease, spreads through direct or indirect contact with the urine of infected animals, primarily rats. Symptoms of leptospirosis in humans range from mild flu-like signs to severe life-threatening forms that affect the liver, kidneys, and central nervous system. In Hawaii, with its humid tropical climate and abundant fresh water, leptospirosis has become a serious threat for those working on plantations and in rural areas, as well as for people enjoying outdoor activities near bodies of water. Although outbreaks of this disease in the 19th century weren't documented as thoroughly as they are today, Doctors of the time noted mysterious cases of fever and jaundice among plantation workers, which can now very likely be attributed to leptospirosis. Rats were also the main carriers of fleas, which in turn spread the bubonic plague. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Hawaii's ports became some of the busiest in the Pacific, cases of plague brought in on trading ships increased. For example, this happened at the beginning of the 20th century when Honolulu experienced such a serious outbreak that the authorities even burned down infected neighborhoods. The plague wasn't a constant widespread problem, but more of a periodic threat coming up because the main cities of Hawaii are ports where plenty of ships kept arriving and still do. Still, there was always the risk of an outbreak that could take many lives. In short, an invasive disaster happened, and they had to find some kind of salvation, which came in the form of a method from Jamaica. Between 1872 and 1877, they had imported these little predators known as small Indian mongooses or Herpestus javanicus to combat rats. The Hawaiians didn't try to reinvent the wheel and just did the same thing. Brought these creatures to their archipelago in the hope of a rescue. The first batch of 72 animals was released on the eastern coast of Hawaii Island in the Hamakua area. The goal was to breed them and then spread them to other islands. Soon after successful breeding, the offspring were sent to plantations on Maui, Molokai, and Oahu. What about Kauai? That's the only island left without mongooses because, according to legend, one of the workers was bitten by an animal during the release. The situation turned out almost exactly like with the rats: no natural predators and plenty of food. On top of that, the species is highly fertile. Mongooses reach sexual maturity at just 4 to 5 months old and can breed up to 3 times a year. Each litter usually has 2 to 4 pups. All this meant that the population was growing at an incredible rate. This allowed the animals to quickly settle in and take up different niches from wet forests to open pastures, especially lowlands and areas around sugarcane plantations. You might think this was just perfect, since that way no rat could hide from the mongooses. The truth is, mongooses didn't fit the role of biological weapon against rats at all. The main reason mongooses didn't succeed in controlling the rat population lies in their behavioral traits. Rats are nocturnal. They're most active at night when they go out looking for food. Mongooses, on the other hand, are active during the day. As a result, these two species could live right next to each other and yet never actually meet. Besides that, mongooses, being omnivores, don't see rats as the main part of their diet. Rats are smart, cautious, hide in hard-to-reach places, and sleep during the day anyway. It's much easier to feed on other creatures that are abundant in Hawaii. According to experts, at the moment, mongooses are threatening 8 species of birds under federal protection, including the Hawaiian goose, or nene, as well as the golden eagle. In places where mongooses have appeared, populations of these species, which naturally nest on the ground, have sharply declined. At the same time, when it comes to the nene, conservation groups say that mongooses are the main reason for their breeding failures, as these invasive predators actively raid nests and eat eggs and chicks. Until the 1950s, the population of these birds in Hawaii numbered around 25,000, but then it dropped to just 30. Yes, it wasn't only mongooses that had an impact, but these creatures, experts say, caused the most serious damage. For example, studies in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park showed that 77% of goose eggs lost between 1978 and 1981 were destroyed by mongooses. The Hawaiian rail, last seen in 1884, disappeared partly because of mongooses. The Kauai o'o, last seen in 1985, didn't stand a chance either. As you can guess, the culprit was the mongooses once again. When mongooses appeared on the islands alongside the rats, it turned out that humans had created 2 deadly threats for the local endemic species at once. One prowls and eats eggs at night, the other during the day. And yet, the 2 species hardly interact with each other. In short, the human strategy looked more like a well-thought-out plan to destroy Hawaii's nature than an attempt to save the islands from a rat invasion. The thing is, mongooses are omnivores, so they can eat anyone smaller than them that they can handle. For example, this caused a lot of trouble for Hawaiian poultry farms. Mongooses are known to attack domestic birds, mainly chickens and chicks, as well as ducks. Of course, they also don't miss a chance to steal and destroy the eggs of these animals. There's even documentary evidence showing that in the early 20th century, farm owners in areas like Kaimuki regularly complained about egg theft and attacks on chickens. The impact of mongooses doesn't stop there. because on top of everything mentioned, they can also cause diseases among livestock. Remember leptospirosis, which rats carry? Mongooses carry it too. And reportedly, its spread among them is almost as fast as among rats. On farms, mongooses contaminate water sources, feed troughs, and pastures. Farm animals like cattle, pigs, and horses can get infected by drinking tainted water or eating grass soiled with mongoose urine. In cattle, leptospirosis commonly causes abortions and infertility, hitting dairy and meat farms hard economically. In pigs, it can cause reproductive issues, and in horses, it can lead to kidney failure. So mongooses are an ongoing biological threat to the health and productivity of Hawaii's livestock sector. By wiping out the local wildlife, mongooses also damage the complex, balanced food chain that used to keep pests in check naturally. Many local birds, like the Hawaiian honeycreeper or apapane, feed on nectar, but they also actively eat pest insects and their larvae. When populations of these birds sharply decline due to mongoose predation, the number of insects attacking crops rises, causing extra losses for farmers. In short, indirectly, mongooses are pests that let other pests harm Hawaiian agriculture. Yes, it's complete sabotage. Overall, everything went completely off plan, forcing Hawaii's residents not just to fight rats, but mongooses too. Today, this battle is fought on multiple fronts, combining the efforts of state and private organizations, scientists, and local communities. The primary method that still works best is catching them physically. Special traps made specifically for mongooses are placed in their habitats. As bait, all kinds of food are used, since mongooses are omnivores, but most often it's eggs or pieces of meat, which they really love. Pest control experts regularly check traps, catching mongooses and stopping them from breeding further, which is especially important in areas where vulnerable bird species and sea turtles live, whose nests have become easy prey for these predators. Do you know why getting rid of mongooses is considered hard? They adjust to traps surprisingly well. In a Hawaiian study, during the first months after the traps were set, one mongoose was caught about every 7 days. But later, that number fell to one mongoose every 20 days. It shows that the animals learn to be cautious around traps, making them increasingly hard to catch. And in general, getting rid of mongooses is tough, at least because hardly anyone keeps track of how many have been caught, no matter the threat these animals pose. Still, there's data showing that on 6 small Hawaiian islands, covering a total of 284 acres, mongooses were successfully removed. That's already not bad, considering all the damage these little creatures cause. Besides trapping, there's a lot of work being done to protect vulnerable areas. Around nesting sites where birds and turtles raise their young, special fences and barriers are set up to keep mongooses out of the protected zones. On top of that, raising awareness among locals and tourists matters a lot. People are told to clean up leftover food and trash that might attract mongooses, and also to make well-protected pens for domestic animals like chickens. All this helps reduce the food available for predators and lower their numbers in populated areas. But do you know what's another problem for Hawaii? That aside from rats and mongooses, locals also have to fight off other species, which can sometimes be even more dangerous for the archipelago. Take pigs, for instance. They might look harmless, but on the islands they become another full-blown catastrophe. Captain James Cook and later other Europeans brought with them larger breeds of pigs, which were left on the islands to breed and serve as a food source for future visits. These European pigs, big and aggressive, quickly adapted to the wild and began interbreeding with their Polynesian relatives. As a result of this mixing, a new, hardier, and more destructive population emerged, which started breeding rapidly across the Hawaiian territories. Decades later, their numbers became uncontrollable, and they spread across all the main islands, wreaking havoc on the local flora and fauna. Feral pigs occupy all kinds of habitats, from dry forests to wet tropical forests. They're highly adaptable, which lets them survive in different conditions. For example, one study on Oahu found that population density in forested areas can reach 60 individuals per 0.4 square miles. The exact number of feral pigs in Hawaii is unknown, but their population's estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands. They can be found on all the major islands except Lanai, and are especially common on Maui, the Big Island, and Oahu. On the Big Island, their numbers are so high that it's believed they occupy around 80 to 90% of the island's habitats, except for the highest and driest areas. The most noticeable damage they cause comes from their natural behavior, digging in the ground. In search of roots, larvae, and worms, pigs methodically turn over the soil, creating huge trench-like furrows up to 16 inches deep. This destroys the forest floor, made up of Hawaiian ferns and mosses, which naturally hold moisture and prevent erosion. As a result, when it rains, water doesn't soak into the soil but rushes down the slopes. Estimates suggest this runoff can be 300 to 500% higher than in unaffected forests. This not only leads to massive erosion, but also pollutes freshwater rivers and streams, harming the local fish and shrimp that are an essential part of them. Besides that, feral pigs have become one of the main reasons why Hawaii's unique plant life is under threat. Digging up the soil not only destroys existing plants, but also stops new ones from growing, since the pigs eat young seedlings. They especially love the roots of endemic trees like Ohia lahua, which are the backbone of many Hawaiian forests. Another major way they cause damage is by spreading invasive plants. Pigs eat the fruits of foreign species like strawberry guava and cat's claw, and then spread their seeds to new areas through their droppings. According to some sources, pigs are largely responsible for invasive plants today, accounting for 60 to 70% of the biomass in Hawaii's tropical forests, displacing native species. And that's not all. The holes dug by pigs, especially in the humid tropical climate, quickly fill with water, turning into perfect breeding grounds for southern house mosquitoes. By the way, they weren't originally in Hawaii either. They were brought here in the 19th century by humans. Who would have guessed? Pigs, without even knowing it, are massively expanding the habitat of these blood-sucking insects. For Hawaii, this has terrifying consequences, since mosquitoes carry deadly diseases like bird malaria and avian pox, which the native birds have absolutely no immunity against. Birds that evolved in isolation have never encountered these kinds of diseases. When mosquitoes were brought to Hawaii, they quickly started spreading illnesses among the birds, which became another reason why Hawaii's long-suffering endemics were in serious danger. What makes things worse is that pigs, by creating more and more breeding grounds for mosquitoes, are forcing the remaining birds to move to higher, cooler areas where mosquitoes can't survive. But these safe zones keep shrinking because global warming lets mosquitoes climb higher and higher into the mountains. In this way, pigs indirectly yet relentlessly push many animals toward extinction. It demonstrates that the harm caused by invasive species is often complex, and one destructive behavior, as with pigs digging, can trigger a chain reaction that puts a whole ecosystem at risk. Pigs are also a direct threat to ground-nesting Hawaiian birds. There have been cases where these animals ate the eggs and chicks of local birds, including, for example, Hawaiian geese, as well as a few other species we already talked about in today's video. Overall, it's another massive problem that's striking Hawaii's nature from every angle. And this isn't the last of it, because there are also parakeets. They might not seem like a threat to Hawaii at first, but in reality, they become yet another risk factor for the local wildlife. These are rose-ringed parakeets. They come from South Asia and Africa, and they ended up on the Hawaiian Islands as pets back in the 1960s. Over time, these pets started escaping into the wild, forming populations living outside human homes. At first, their numbers grew slowly, but then, as often happens with invasive species, there was a boom. For example, on the island of Kauai, where in the 1990s there were only about 200 birds, their population by 2021 was estimated at 12,500. This makes them one of the most numerous invasive species. The harm these parakeets cause is wide-ranging. To start with, they cause huge damage to agriculture, which is one of the biggest problems for local farmers. Being omnivorous and aggressive animals, they attack crops in large flocks. At the same time, invasive birds not only eat ripe fruits and seeds, but also unripe ones, which makes the damage even worse. According to research, small farms on Kauai lose an average of 10% of their crops, and in some cases, losses can reach 30% for crops like breadfruit, lychee, and longan. These birds also harm corn and sunflower fields, leading to significant economic losses in the agricultural sector. Besides the economic damage, rose-ringed parakeets pose a serious threat to Hawaii's unique wildlife. They push out native birds, aggressively competing with them for food and nesting spots. While there isn't enough research yet on their impact on endemic species, there are documented cases of displacement. What's more, these parakeets can also carry avian malaria, which is deadly for local birds that have no immunity. They can also help spread invasive plants like macania and ivy gourd by carrying their seeds around. So parakeets, being an invasive species themselves, make the damage from already established alien plants even worse, putting extra strain on the fragile ecosystem. Their large gatherings near towns also cause problems for people, with noise, lots of droppings, and the risk of disease. This story, just like with feral pigs, highlights how tricky it is to predict and control the consequences of even the seemingly harmless introduction of species into new ecosystems. So you get the idea. It's easy to confuse Hawaii with Australia, which is probably the most striking example of an invasive species problem caused by humans. Still, it's good that both in Hawaii and Australia, people are trying to fight back, even if sometimes it doesn't go as planned, like with rats and mongooses.